at the forefront of Keir Starmer's mind.
And as you say, the 4 people, of course, didn't vote for him. It's important to sort of set the tone to show, well, he hopes to show that he'll be a prime minister.
It is to show that he's not crooked. One of the refrains that came, I think, from voters, but it also just seized upon by the Labour campaign, is it's one rule for them. They're arrogant, they're cocky, they're taking people for granted, and who wants to project the opposite of that, which is I govern for everybody. I want to be writing about service and humility and so on.
And we spoke shortly before the election, and you said then you thought it was going to be difficult moments. Did it live up to your expectations? Did it exceed your expectations?
Well, why do people say difficult moments? I mean, that's completely out of context. I mean, it's awful. It's really bad. And but what I came onto as a kind of silver lining, that there are just enough Tory MPs to form a viable opposition, and weirdly, look at what Labour has achieved since 2019, even in the first past the post system, with savvy voters who know how to tactically vote, there is potentially a route back to the Conservatives. I think the reform issue is a big problem in the north, but equally Tories have to recognise that Tory voters actually voted for the Lib Dems, switched to get Tories out because they were fed up with their own party, and the Tory party is going to have to make a very quick decision as to where it points, and obviously I want it to point to the centre. I think that's the only way you win elections in this country. I think reform is a false friend, and the policies they offer is a false friend, but there will be a fight between the likes of Suella Braverman and Tom Tegan-Hart. With someone like Penny Badenoch not quite clear which way she will pivot. So that is a big, if the Tories can get this right very quickly, there is a route back.
Who would you be backing then?
They're not a hugely inspiring cast of characters.
That's not the line from Central Office, is it?
They're not an inspiring cast of characters. I like Penny Badenoch, but she can go off the deep end. She's got this kind of weird obsession with culture wars. I like Tom Tegan-Hart, but I'm not sure how kind of charismatic in whether he'll cut through. Jeremy Hunt, sheer resilience, my God. Holding on to his seat like that. I always want to give him the leadership as a consolation prize for being a Tory MP. About James Cleverly. I really like James Cleverly, and funny enough, if he went for it, I'd be quite up for it. I think he did a really good job as Foreign Secretary. He wasn't necessarily expected to. I think he did a good job as Home Secretary.
I'm just going to break in because we can see Jonathan Reynolds now walking down the steps of Downing Street, or the street, I should say. Jonathan Reynolds there, formerly the Shadow Business Secretary, will be hoping for a job in Cabinet now. Let's go to Sam Pellicer's standing by.
That's right, Johnny Reynolds has one of the toughest jobs if he gets the portfolio in government that he had in opposition as Business Secretary, which means that on the shoulders of the 43-year-old just walking onto the pavement on Downing Street and crossing the road to enter the big black door is the job of finding and boosting growth. This man must deliver more investment and therefore more tax revenue in order to fund public services. Can he do it? He is very close to Keir Starmer, a trusted member of his team all the way through since the day Keir Starmer became Labour leader. Another figure on the right of the party, broad beam, looking at me as he then turns to go in the door, and he's in. Will Johnny Reynolds become Business Secretary?
Now I'm going to break in because we have had the first official appointment, the press statement from number 10 Downing Street. The King has been pleased to approve the appointment of the Right Honourable Angela Rayner as Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. She will also be Deputy Prime Minister. So that was first official news. She was the first person to call through the door of number 10, Angela Rayner, Deputy Prime Minister, but the key appointment, Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. Sam.
Levelling Up survives. Now that's a little bit of a turn up for a book. A Boris Johnson moniker that didn't exist before he came along has now made it into government as Angela Rayner becomes Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, as well as Deputy Prime Minister. So that is a big portfolio for an important member of Keir Starmer's top team. There is a sense that Angela Rayner will be prepared to use her political clout and her political talents to make sure she can shape this government in the way that she wants. She had at point a difficult relationship with Keir Starmer. In 2021, a reshuffle where he tried to demote her, one of the toughest moments of Keir Starmer's premiership. But since then, and she won that battle, by the way, and remained with the roles and the titles that she wanted, this 44-year-old that you can see on the screen has managed to claw back influence and claw back, it would seem, the respect of the leader himself. He has decided to bring her firmly into the tent. That's what the announcement in the last minute confers. Deputy Prime Minister, a job title that Keir Starmer didn't have to give her, alongside Levelling Up Secretary, a title that I'm surprised has survived, puts her in charge of making people lives better, as well as deputising for the Prime Minister. An absolutely fundamental role in the government that's being formed today.
In some ways, one of the very first decisions of the new Prime Minister to keep the Department of Levelling Up and to put the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of it as well. Let's bring in Shami, shall we? What do you make of the actions of Keir Starmer so far?
Well, I think that's a very canny announcement to make first. Angela Rayner is the kind of politician who reaches places others cannot reach, to coin a phrase that I think Margaret Thatcher once used of Peter Carrington or something. There are people who hear Angela and don't hear other politicians because of her unique voice, her backstory and so on. Housing, crucially important. On your point about preserving the Department for Levelling Up, I think there's something to be said for not doing endless machinery of government changes in the way that some governments do. Let's change the nameplates on the department. You know, a lot of that is a distraction from actually delivering on policy. Housing, crucially important to the missions and the promises that have been made. I'd be interested in that particular brief whether Angela still keeps her influence over workplace reforms and the influence over things like abolishing zero-hour contracts and so on, because that is a part of her previous brief that was very important to her, very important to the trade union. So I'm not quite clear whether that it is still within the brief we've just heard, but very good news that she is there as the first announcement.
And Keir Starmer really ripping through this as well. 12 arrivals we've had of the new cabinet in Downing Street in just 47 minutes.
I mean, I haven't done any read across from the shadow cabinet in the cabinet, but one of the things that the Tories did, which I thought was a huge mistake, was basically every single person in Parliament was a member of the cabinet. I mean, I think at one point you had sort of 38 people sitting around the cabinet table, so all these people attending the cabinet. Weirdly, with a parliamentary party of 420 odd, you might be tempted to do that, but it would be nice to see a slimmed down cabinet where actually attending cabinet actually meant something, and there was cabinet discussion.
And also incentives for people for the future. If everybody starts at the top table, the only way is down.
And Ed, can I ask how today's felt? Because it just watching, from my perspective, watching Keir Starmer there at number 10, seeing now people that we're used to saying of the shadow cabinet minister, they're walking through the gates of Downing Street. How does it feel after so many years to see Labour in there?
It's not felt great. I mean, it's felt much worse than I thought it would, because obviously, weirdly, I've been thinking about, these politics have kind of realigned in some way between Brexiteers and Remainers in a kind of very, very broad brush kind of way, like protectionist versus globalists or whatever, almost back to sort of 19th century politics, if you like. And so I've been quite free and easy in kind of taking a pop at the Tory party for the last 2 or 3 years, because it's basically been run by Brexiteers who I blame not only for damaging our country, but really damaging my party, the party that I've worked for since I was 16. So I have been kind of very free and easy in my criticism. I get a lot of pushback over you're not really a Tory. But when you see it actually happen, it is fairly devastating. It's happening to my generation. It's happening to a lot of MPs who I came into Parliament with, who have lost their seats. So that's very, very sad. But it's also terrible to see my party on its knees. And also, you do want to play a role in trying to put it back up in 97. Even though I wasn't an MP, I played a role in trying to tell the Tory party, please love your country as it is today, rather than the country you imagine it was in the 1950s. I hope they will do that again.
Just
Having your own constituency as well. I mean, no Conservatives in Oxfordshire, for example.
Yeah, Oxfordshire is
on yellow and red and big bottom wanted.
you know, it's been lost. Rupert Harrison, who was the candidate in Bicester,
George Osborne's economic
advisor, he would have been a very important talent in Parliament if he'd got elected. Didn't get elected. Mild constituency, big bottom wanted, you know, didn't even go Liberal in the 97 landslide.
I thought for Robert Buckland actually. I thought that was early on in the night in Swindon, and I think that his very passionate speech from a guy who's not a shouty politician at all. I have a lot of time for Robert Buckland as a kind of rule of law, one nation conservative who cares about things like the Convention on Human Rights. He issued a real warning to his colleagues to end the circus, as he described it. Then, of course, not long later, you had Suella Braverman's response. So we begin to see this battle developing for the soul of the British Conservative Party.
Can I ask you the same question as well? Because I think it's fair to say that we're probably not, a natural kind of bedfellow in many ways in the Labour movement is Keir Starmer when it comes to way position and stuff. Maybe that's unfair. You might not feel that way. But how do you feel about seeing him on the steps of Nutti?
I thought that the speech was very impressive. As I said earlier, it was really good to hear that humility, and I think it came across as very sincere. Service, understanding that not everybody voted for us. He didn't say explicitly, but he will know that the turnout wasn't great. So there's fabulous majority in parliamentary terms, but not a fabulous turnout. And to talk about service, to seek unity, to say that he was especially addressing people who hadn't voted Labour, I thought that was very heartening and very impressive. For a Prime Minister of any stripe with such a massive majority, you really do want to use that humbly, I think.
Well, it's interesting you mention Robert Buckland, because of course there we've got a retread coming back in Heidi Alexander, who's someone you might well expect to see in a Labour government at some point. I do want to ask you what you think Jeremy Corbyn is going to do in this Parliament. I mean, there is almost a sort of faction now of pro-Palestinians around him. I mean, how do you think he's going to conduct himself?
Well, obviously, for some time, your colleagues in journalism have been trying to assess to what extent that conflict was going to affect particularly Labour in relation to messaging in the past. And the messaging did move on, but I think most would accept that there were some slips earlier on. I think it ought to be easier in government than it was in opposition. At times, I think it was particularly hard to be in opposition, but with lots of people who, of course, care about human rights and care about conflicts in the world, to be perhaps under greater scrutiny even than the government. Well, now you're in the government and you have a potential opportunity to get the messaging right and to actually have some influence rather than just be punished for things you have actually relatively little direct diplomatic influence over.
I guess the other thing we're talking about independence entering Parliament. 4 MPs for reform that are hoping for a fifth with a recount in Basildon, and how much of an influence do you think that's going to have?
Well, don't forget, obviously, the Greens have also got 4 MPs, so it's a pattern, isn't it? And 4 independents as well, it's a pattern of voters going to fringe parties, sounds pejorative, but the non-mainstream parties. And that may be something that is developing. But as I say, what you have with reform is, for me, a real crisis for the Conservative Party. Crisis is probably too strong a word, but to physically have them in the House of Commons, to have someone like Nigel Farage, who is Trumpian in terms of his compelling political cut-through, is going to cause the Conservative Party a huge amount of trouble. And, I was listening to Danny Finkelstein, the Tory peer, this morning, and he's very thoughtful about this. He thinks, funny enough, that, Nigel Farage will split with his 3 colleagues very quickly, that reform has to come to the Conservative Party as much as the Tories come to reform themselves. So it's up in the air.
I'm going to break in because we've had our second official appointment that has been made. The King, we're told by Downing Street, has been pleased to approve the appointment of the Right Honourable Rachel Reeves MP as Chancellor of the Exchequer. No surprises there, but confirmation that Rachel Reeves has become the new Chancellor of the Exchequer. Worth pointing out, of course, that in the 803-year history of that job, is the first time we've had a woman in post.
Well, that's a wonderful first, isn't it? And that, obviously we've had women prime ministers, all of them Conservative, that has to be said. But yeah, the first woman Chancellor, I think that is a very important first. And of course, she's the first woman Chancellor in a Parliament that I think probably has more women than ever. In House of Commons with more women than ever. And you know, there's regional diversity. Labour has done well in all of in England, Scotland and Wales. But no, that's an important first to have a woman Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I think we can cross to our Deputy Presenter, Sam Coates, who's in Downing Street. I can see Ed Miliband starting the walk up the street, Sam.
This is a walk that he will have wanted to do. He perhaps would have wanted to do it in different circumstances. The Labour Party leader between 2010 and 2015 could have been Prime Minister, but lost the 2015 election. But in many ways was responsible for Keir Starmer's entry into politics. Now Ed Miliband walking up the streets. He was the shadow climate secretary. Climate is his passion. He might be the first cabinet minister to return to the same job he did in the last government. Let's see whether Ed Miliband, 54-year-old figure, he was by Gordon Brown's side for all the years of New Labour, ran the Labour Party for years but took it down to defeat in 2015, and now has been shadow climate secretary under Keir Starmer, pushing the climate agenda that's been forced to retreat somewhat over that £28 billion investment promise every year, which got scaled back in March of this year. Now walking into number 10, will he become the climate secretary as we believe?
And Sam, Keir Starmer's really rattling through the appointments here. It's making me realise, and I guess just kind of reflect on the fact of how organised this Labour Party is, whether it is the efficiency of the campaign that won so many seats, we maximised the votes in the right places to be the most efficient, and then also, of course, they were ready for the election when Rishi Sunak called it, and it feels like this is a man who is ready to appoint his cabinet as well.
Oh, I completely agree with you, Sophie. Although you could apply a slightly more cynical spin to it. It's quite hard to do a reshuffle when you're already in government and there are lots of plates spinning, and quite frankly, if there's a reshuffle, often some of them smashing at the same time. Labour has had this time to plan, and it's a little bit easier, if we're being honest, if your cabinet appointments mirror, 90% of them mirror the shadow cabinet appointments and the jobs that those people were in this morning. So yes, rattling through it. What's interesting is they go in and we don't know what the job is, and then we're being informed largely on social media when the appointment is confirmed, and we've only had two such appointments confirmed, Angela Rayner and